think we can kick things off, and I'm delighted to introduce Joe Schifrin.
Mute. Okay. Welcome to the JUFJ Heschel Awards Experience. This is session 2, Torah for this moment. We're so happy you have joined us tonight for this 50-minute session. My name is Joe Schifrin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a leader on the Montgomery County Leadership Council. This year, the Heschel Vision Experience has gone online with 3 nights of learning, action, and celebration. We hope you will join us for some of the great offerings on Thursday night too. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. There are so many friends here with us. In order to have the best viewing experience of this presentation, I encourage you to click the 3 buttons on the top right of your screen and choose Speaker View. Please note, we are recording the program so we can share it with those who can't be here tonight. If you do not want to be included, simply turn your camera off. If you have any technical issues or questions during the program, please use the chat function to message tech support. There are folks standing by ready to help. We know you will have questions during the program. Please put your questions in the chat also, and we'll leave time at the end to answer as many as we can. And now, let's hear from Rabbi Elizabeth Richmond, Deputy Director of Jews United for Justice and Rabbi in Residence.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everybody. I'm really delighted to see so many people here tonight to learn some Torah. So one of the beautiful things about Judaism is that it has something to say about everything in our lives. Sometimes that's great, sometimes we feel like that's less great, but it's one of the truly beautiful things is how all-encompassing it is. And right now we are living through a moment, the likes of which I'm guessing most of us here have never experienced before. So this session is about accessing Jewish wisdom to help us continue to navigate these turbulent times. What can we learn from our rich heritage that really helps us move with the times and sustain ourselves and sustain our communities? So here's the agenda for tonight. We have 2 fantastic teachers who are each going to take about 10 minutes to share some text with us. And then we get to listen as they engage each other and engage us in conversation about the texts. As Joe said, please go ahead and put your questions and your comments in the chat along the way. We'll try and scan them, and we'll certainly leave time towards the end of the session to do some Q&A and conversation with our speakers. So you have our speakers' bios in the app. So I'm just going to introduce them briefly so we can spend more time actually learning from them. Rabbi Suzanne Rachel Hirsch is a member of the clergy team at Adat Shalom Reconstructionist Congregation in Bethesda, where she has been involved for more than a quarter of a century. She also serves on the Executive Council of the Washington Board of Rabbis. Welcome, Rabbi Suzanne Hirsch.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Rabbi Esther Letterman, who is the Union for Reform Judaism's Director of Congregational Innovation. She also sits on the Central Conference of American Rabbis Task Force on the Experience of Women in the Rabbinate. And I just want to say that both of them are women whose leadership has really had a profound impact, not only on our region, but also on the larger American Jewish community. And I'm just proud and appreciative to welcome them here tonight. So thank you. Rabbi Suzanne Hirsch, we will start with you. And let me just say also, I will put the links to the source sheets for the text that the rabbis will be teaching us in the chat again, so you can download them and access them that way.
Great. Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Great to be with all of you. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes about the arrival of the Hebrew month of Kislev, and then bring in a little bit of teaching from Mordechai Kaplan. Thought it would be a night to bring him into the room a little bit. As Adat Shalom has been so honored to be one of the honorees for this year's Heschel Awards, and a chance for us to lift up some of the teachings that come specifically from our world of Reconstructionist Judaism. But first, I want to ask us to just tune into this time of year. Today was Rosh Chodesh Kislev, so a belated Chodesh Tov to everyone. We entered this month that's best known, of course, for the Hanukkah lights and the Hanukkah festival, and also the darkness that those lights neutralize every year. So think about Hanukkah for a minute. It's a holiday that has kind of shape-shifted in Jewish history. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but I know I grew up hearing mostly about the miracle of the oil. The oil lasted for 8 days, and maybe just a little bit about the paramilitary victory. But the emphasis was always on the story of the miraculous rededication of that second temple. And of course, the rededication was the result of a violent clash between the Hasmonean era Jews and the Syrian Greek rulers of Jerusalem at that time. And the fight was over religious freedom and tolerance. It wasn't actually a story about oil. It was a fight over the limits of Hellenistic influence and authority. The whole thing about latkes and applesauce versus latkes and sour cream, that wasn't even on anyone's mind at the time that this history unfolded. Later, in the early centuries of the first millennium of the Common Era, our sages, when they were establishing the holiday in the Jewish calendar, turned their focus on the miracle of the oil. They wanted people to see it as a symbol of godly presence in the midst of their struggle for religious freedom. But we know that they downplayed the successful guerrilla warfare that was carried out by the Maccabee fighters. They were living in a time when they wanted to make the governing Romans know that they could be trusted, that they weren't going to stage any more violent revolts, especially, of course, not after the devastating result of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So Hanukkah grew to be a holiday about light, miracles, gelt, chocolate gelt, latkes, and those spinning tops whose acronym spelled a great miracle happened there. And we know that it pretty much stayed that way all through the tumultuous Jewish diaspora until the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, 20th century, and the rise of modern Zionism, when suddenly, after almost 2,000 years of a great miracle happened there, it was now a great miracle happened here. With the strength of national independence came the confidence to remember the fuller Hanukkah story, including the part about military might, about national independence, and most importantly, about the fight for religious and civic freedom, which is right at the core of a successful democracy. I was thinking about this, while those first decades of modern Zionism were building strength and growing, while that was happening, while the reawakening of the fuller Hanukkah story was also going on, a young teacher, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, was beginning to develop the ideas that would later come to be known as Jewish Reconstructionism, and ultimately lead to the formation of the Reconstructionist Jewish denomination. It was just interesting to think while those early Zionists were reclaiming a story of national might, Kaplan and his circle of theologians were seeking a way to gently, reverently take apart and rebuild our ancient religious tradition in a way that honored history and which also harnessed some of the principles of American society, especially democracy. Since the time of the early Jewish sages, our tradition has always maintained a commitment to recording the minority view. Anybody who's read a page of Talmud can tell you that there are no final decisions announced, but debates are recorded and minority views are given a platform. But in the end, the rabbi has always still been Mara Da'atra, right? We say master of the house. Until Kaplan, Jewish life was not democratic in particular. I was smiling to myself, putting these thoughts together and thinking about some of the, misas, like some of the stories I've heard about Kaplan and his own personal relationship to democratic leadership. That's for another discussion, I guess. But in his constructing Judaism, he really sought to embrace the democratic ideology of the United States. The Reconstructionist movement was the first Jewish denomination to be born on American soil. And so it's not surprising, makes sense that democratic ideology would be central to the establishment of Reconstructionist thought and practice. So I was looking for how to tie together Hanukkah and democracy and Reconstructionism. And lo and behold, in Kaplan's diary in 1942, he uses one of the more famous passages from the prophet Zechariah to support his thinking on how democracy, American democracy, influences Jewish life and the reciprocal, how Jewish life, how Jewish thought contributes to the establishment of American democracy. This feels so important to lift up as we enter this darkest month of the year, in a season that is about as dark as any of us have experienced. And a time when we anticipate the increasing light of 8 nights of the festival and want that light to inspire us and strengthen us to move into a new secular year. Here we are, witnessing the greatest threats to American democracy since, I don't know, maybe the American Civil War. In a time of such chaos, so much instability, where the own incumbent president is challenging the legitimacy of the election. Reminding ourselves of our Jewish commitment to democracy is important and nourishing for us. So I want to look with you at the passage that Kaplan uses to support his thinking about this connection between Jewish life and American democracy. It's the one that we read on the Shabbat of Hanukkah as the Haftara. And Elizabeth, or I don't know if anybody else has the ability to screen share. I could screen share. Is that a better thing to do?
You're able. That would be great. Can you do that?
Yeah, I think I can. Just want to show. Here. So this is just this excerpt from the Haftara for Hanukkah, and I won't read through the whole thing, but I wanted to get to this passage. Is this little screen sharing thingy in the way here? Let me move this out of the way. There. This passage here, which I bet is familiar to many of us, but just in case, just to get us all on the same page, these are words, as we said, from the prophet Zechariah, and where, just to sort of set the stage, he is speaking to his people, to our people, in the 5th century BCE, at the time that there was a growing plan and anticipation of the building of the Second Temple. And he's laying out some imagery about what that Second Temple will look like. And finally, at the end of this passage, he says, this is Zechariah speaking, Vaya'an vayomer elai lemor, then it was explained to me as follows, Zed davar Adonai el Zerubbabel. This was the word of God coming to Zerubbabel, one of the leaders of the community at the time, saying, Lo v'chayil v'lo b'koach, not by might and not by power, ki im bruchi amar Adonai tzevaot, but yet with the Spirit of God. And that is how a fair and free society will be shaped. So here's the passage from Kaplan, December of 1942. And this I should give proper credit to Mel Skult, who was the editor of these published diaries. Kaplan says, the contribution which Judaism has made and should continue to make to democracy and the American way of life is best summarized in the motto enunciated by the prophet Zechariah that we just saw. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the God of hosts. And to add to the supplement, Kaplan says, of Hillel's famous summary of Judaism, the rest is commentary. Go and learn. He continues, the importance of Zechariah's motto is that it furnishes the key to that inner freedom without which democracy is merely a hollow form. That inner freedom I'm adding now, meaning the reliance on a peaceful spirit to help us make our way forward in national and communal conversation, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, sets forth the mental attitude which is a prerequisite to the building of a world on the foundations of peace. Before we can have democracy, he says, we must will it. I think he means we must will that peaceful foundation first. That calls for a sense of values which are certain to direct our will toward democracy and impel us to live by it and give all are all in defense of it. And just to end here, if democracy is to function as the soul of the American way of life, and if that way of life is to become a means to self-fulfillment for every American, the sense of values which measure the highest good, not by might or by power, not by coercion, not by thuggery, not by playing with the truth, but by justice and mercy, must be incorporated in an American system of law and the process of education. So it's just, you know, it's not anything that that we wouldn't say, of course, but to read it and to hear in the 1940s how much he was lifting up this entry to democratic society by way of peace, by way of civil relations on the national level, is, I feel, so important for us to lift up right now, this month, this week, and as we move into this season of light. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing Rabbi Esther and the others.
Thank you so much. It's such a treat to hear some of that history that, at least for me, I don't often get to hear, and to reflect back on what things were like for previous generations and the lens that they were looking through. So thank you for the opportunity. Rabbi Letterman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. That was taking notes and luxuriating in the text from Zechariah. So I also have some text. I'm not going to share my screen, but you should be able to use them in the link that Rabbi Richmond had pointed out. I'm going to, it's going to maybe appear on the page that these are very disjointed texts, but the point of my job as a teacher of Torah is to sort of be the oral text that weaves these together to sort of make sense of them. There's actually 6 texts, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to do the first 3, and sort of the rest are there on the page for you to ponder. So when we got together to sort of talk about this teaching for tonight and sort of Torah and wisdom for our times and this moment that we're in, as I started to think about it, these 3 texts sort of jumped out. This first text is from Midrash Rabban, the book of Exodus, and it's taking as its context the Israelites escaping from slavery in Egypt and getting to the sea and making its way to through the sea, and then singing Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea, that actually there's a special Shabbat we chant from, and the Israelites sort of rushing forth in song. And the rabbis who imagined sort of what came in the white spaces in the Torah, sort of what was not recorded, imagined the angels coming in and singing first. And there was the celestial chorus of angels' voices, and God stops them. And I'm going to read the text. And of course, as I was reading it to myself, I realized I very much anthropomorphized God in the text as a male. And I just want to, that is not my theology, but so I'm just going to beg your forgiveness. As soon as the Israelites emerged from the sea, The angels rushed in to be the first to utter song before God, but God said, "Let my children be the first to do so." God said to God's angels, "I am not in any way abasing you by saying that they should precede you, but being mortals, they had better be the first before any of them die. But you, being immortal, can utter song whenever you wish." And there's a couple of reasons I brought this. One is that reminder of how temporary and fleeting it is to be human. And that just this moment when God is like, you might have the most beautiful voices, angels, but I want to hear from these people who've been through a horrific moment and decades of awfulness. And it's their voices that I want to hear first, partially because of the temporary nature of life. Also, I brought this because to me, it's a reminder of my need to sing, whether metaphorically or literally. And part of why that was important to me was, listen, the week, and partially I'm going to just claim the selfishness. It was my birthday on November 3rd. It's a terrible day to have a birthday. In this year in particular, because the emotions, I don't know, I'll speak for myself. The emotions I went through went from anticipatory grief of, November 2nd and 3rd. Like, I live in anticipatory grief all the time, to like screaming on Shabbat and my kids going, "What is wrong with mom?" And I'm like, thank God, and then also being stupefied and sort of into shock at being like, on the one hand, I am so grateful for the incoming administration. And also, how did this many million people, as one of my colleagues said to me, yeah, white supremacy wasn't a deal breaker. And so, but I needed to remind myself that it was also okay to sing. And just like for the Israelites, right, who are standing on the sea, like, they haven't hit the promised land either. They're about to go wandering for 40 more years. They don't know that, and they're going to get a Torah, which is going to help them. But there's this beautiful moment of just like, just let them sing, just sing. And you know what? It's temporary. It's also imperfect. I mean, I think the other piece about this is like, the angels I think of as perfect beings, and we humans, we are certainly not perfect. So just sort of a recognition of that. So that was partially just a reminder that in the balancing between two poles of the joy of some of the firsts, and like, I'll just be very, like, you're fired. Like, I'm so grateful that we fired Trump, and yet there is still so much work to do, and there is still so much oppression going on in our country. Second text, always go back to the beginning. So these are the first two verses from the book of Genesis. My translation: in the beginning, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And then actually, if you keep reading, and then God said that was good, and then God separated. So what drew me to this text was this idea that the world started in chaos, tohu vavohu, as it says in the Hebrew, and God makes order out of it through words. The only way we see God in Genesis as a creator, and God creates through words. And then later in the beginning of Genesis, we humans are called B'Tselem Elohim. We are created in the image of God, and there's a lot of understandings of what that means. But one of the ways I pull on is like, we too create worlds through the words that we use. We too are creative and can create order out of chaos through the words that we use. And for me, this is a moment to reclaim language and words that can guide us to create the kind of world and America we want to have. The challenge, of course, is I'm the nervousness, the sort of the part of me that's not jumping for joy is I'm worried that we don't share a language anymore. I'm worried that the social contract of what it means to be an American doesn't exist. The debate between those who are moved by the word democracy and those who are moved by the word liberty. How are we using, and will we be able to come up with a shared language that we can all understand without out having to give up or compromise, right, around our core ideals? So a little bit of that. And then I want to end with this teaching from Rabbi Hartman. And I owe this to Rabbi Chazan Hirsch here, who reminded me that it was Rosh Chodesh Kislev, because this is my favorite teaching about Hanukkah. And David Hartman basically asks, the miracle of the 8 nights, okay, I get it. Like this, it was actually a miracle of 7 nights because they thought the cruse of oil was going to last a day. So what was the miracle of the first night? Because the miracle, it wasn't a miracle that it lasted that first night. And he writes, he basically says, I'm not going to read the quote for quote. He basically says, the miracle was that they lit the menorah at all. That without knowing if the oil would last, essentially without knowing if they would survive and be able to dedicate the temple, they lit it anyway. The miracle was the faith of the Israelites to go ahead and light without knowing if the dedication would last. And then he ends, this text is, the Hanukkah lights encourage one to trust human beginnings and to focus one's passions and efforts on whatever opportunities are available at the present moment. And that is where I am right now as we enter this moment of desperately wanting to believe and trust in human beginnings, because I believe we're potentially at another beginning. And with the present reality of what we know, without knowing what the future holds, and being able as human beings to kind of have faith in ourselves, just like God has faith in us. So my only request of all of you is, because I desperately tried to get a woman in here, it wasn't a Jewish source. There's a beautiful poem from Rupi Kaur at the end. Read it. It's amazing, and she's Canadian, as am I. So she's not Jewish, but it's okay. We can get wisdom from all sources.
You want to go ahead and read it for us?
All right, I'll read it for you. Rupi Kaur. This is from one of her collections of poetry. This is the recipe of life, said my mother, as she held me in her arms as I wept. Think of those flowers you plant in the garden each year. They will teach you that people too must wilt, fall, root, rise in order to bloom. So, thank you.
Thank you. What a beautiful teaching, reminding us to have faith in ourselves, a faith that might have been shaken by the last couple of years, and for reminding us of that very Jewish truth that we can hold 2 ideas and 2 sets of feelings simultaneously. We can feel like we're wandering, we can feel like we're angry and we're traumatized, and we can make the time and space to dance and to celebrate. Both really important reminders. Thank you. So I want to ask the 2 of you, before we open things up for Q&A and comments, I'm wondering if you heard or saw anything in each other's teachings or the way the teachings might interact with each other that's on your mind or that you noticed.
I noticed a couple of things, but Rachel, do you want to go first?
Well, I'm just really drawn to this picture that you painted, Esther, about going forth even when you feel scared about what's coming up, or at least that you don't know what's coming up. And I'm just really struck by, I'm teaching a class for our 7th graders right now on the Shoah. Boy, what a great topic to bring up right now. Turn on your Zoom screen and let's learn about, yeah. But to imagine, so this passage that I shared from Mordechai Kaplan, as I said, was written in 1942. And there would have been plenty of, evidence already by then that things were going horribly wrong for the Jewish people and for many, many millions of others in Europe and in the theater of World War II. And well, there he is writing about democracy and lifting up Zechariah and saying this is the way forward, and we have to hold on to these principles and not be completely shut down by the realities we're facing. So I really thank you for that, Esther.
Yeah. The parts that there were two things that stood out. Well, one was a linguistic connection, which is a little bit more obvious in the Hebrew, that, in the Zechariah, we're talking about the Spirit, God's Spirit, not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit. And then in the Genesis text, the phrase is Ruach Elohim. The word ruach that's is in both places. Ruach is God's Spirit in Zechariah, and then the wind of God in Genesis. And I thought that was I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I don't know what to make of it, but I was like, there's something about the Spirit and the wind. And then I'll also say that in the Kaplan text, I was writing a little bit, like the sense of what one's values are. I almost feel like I want to pull it up because I had it here. That calls for a sense of values which are certain to direct our will toward democracy and impel us to live by it and give our all in defense of it. To me, as I was hearing that and reading that, that to me is like, what does it mean for us to understand the words that we use to talk about what's the social contract? What is the common narrative we want to agree for? I mean, listen, in my wildest dreams, I would love there to be, I wouldn't necessarily call it a constitutional convention, but what would it look like to reimagine our founding documents, right? What would it be like to reimagine a rewriting, or put at least the Declaration of Independence in the middle and create like a Talmud-like commentary on it? But that, when I was thinking about Kaplan, and when you say that he wrote this in 1942, America had joined the war already. I mean, it was already raging. Yeah, it gives me hope, and it's definitely that sense of like, you have to be clear what you value before you can go and build the kind of world you want to build. Very rich.
So I wonder what you both think about how our Jewish communities might go about that project, because we heard Rabbi Kaplan, right, talking about the will to create this peaceful foundation, and then we heard you, Rabbi Letterman, worrying, as I think many of us worry, about the fact that we don't share the same language anymore. So I wonder what role there might be for Jewish wisdom or Jewish communities in trying to address some of that deep-seated problem. An easy.
It's I got an answer in that back pocket.
Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. Yeah.
It's a great question. It's such a rich question.
I would need some time.
That's okay.
No, I mean, I don't have an answer. I think where my brain goes is, listen, I think we as Jews need to be engaged in the public square. This is not a time to retreat into our houses of worship and see them as places of literal sanctuary where we hide. I think we need to put a stake in our ground. And I think the biggest challenge, at least in my experience for the religious community in this era, is, and I work for a 501c3, right, where we did a lot of great civic engagement without, claiming, that we wanted a certain party to win or person to win. But what do you do when the issue is the person, right? And anyway, so I would say continuing to put a stake in the ground. And listen, I think one of the hardest things is, I keep thinking of something Arlie Russell Hochschild wrote in Strangers in a Strange Land that I read after the 2016 election, which was like trying to understand people voting against their economic self-interest. She has this phrase about climbing the empathy wall. On the one hand, I do want to climb that empathy wall and really understand some people who voted the opposite of me. And at the same time, I'm not willing to do it if it means I have to paper over the, like, I'm also not, there's a part of me that's also really not interested in that. Like, because I do firmly believe that, most people turned up their noses and just said, I'm going to vote out of my economic self-interest or my racial self-interest, and not. So I don't know what the answer is. I do know we can't stop talking and we can't hide. That's all. But
going back to the emphasis on words and how much words create worlds.
right. Because I don't think they're a monolith. Like, I don't think, just like I don't think we're a monolith, whether, you know, whether you voted for Biden or were a Sanders person before that. Like, I don't, but gosh, it's painful. And I also acknowledge that as a white person, like I can't even, like, I already, you know, there's a privilege there. It you know, like, in like, there's certain things that I can get away with living with in a way that I think other marginalized, oppressed communities, people of color, trans individuals, the threat is even greater.
Yeah. I would thank you, Esther, so that I could sit here and think a little bit and listen to you. It's funny, you know, I'm in a community that's part of this movement that's really rejected the idea of Jewish chosenness, and really struggled with it, just more than rejected it. But I feel like if we were chosen for some role, then at least right now, that role has to be like a drumbeat going again and again to the texts in our Torah, and I guess in our Tanakh, but right now I'm talking about really the Torah, the texts that say over and over, you must treat the stranger with kindness. And, you know, remembering that we can define stranger in all kinds of different ways. It can mean an immigrant. It can also just mean a person who's on the margins of our society, who's not necessarily officially an immigrant, but as Esther was just saying, that's what we bring to the table right now. Judaism brings empathy to the table. And in an American society where empathy has been so badly wounded and like torn and damaged, we have to be part of the voice in this country that brings that back as a central value.
Yeah, hi everyone. I am a stranger here. My name is Julia. May I make a statement or ask you questions while I'm listening and gaining knowledge from you? Well, based on the conversation that I've just heard, here is the acceptance of one religion, and Jewish is one that probably seems to be not to be acceptable in the society. Since we are going through a transition here, politically speaking, do you think maybe Biden and Harris administration might modify this part of, I won't say the old constitution, but will come up with some new bills, or we as people who realize the importance of acceptance in religion as a new bill at maybe start at the local level first and then move up to the federal level? Do you understand my question?
I don't know if I do, but I think I do. And
Okay. So what do you think?
I have a beginning of a thought, and I will then turn it over to Esther and others. I don't know about legislation. I don't know whether that is an effective tool for fighting the kind of problems you're raising, Julia. But I am very hopeful that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, just by the example of who they are, and I have to admit, as a Jewish person, I feel at the same time kind of comforted and actually, if I'm really honest, a little bit nervous about the fact that they both have strong family ties to people who are Jewish. Kamala Harris's husband, and then Joe Biden, apparently all of his kids are married to Jewish people, it turns out, or I don't know if I'm saying that right. And I've been saying to my husband, is that going to turn out to be bad for Jewish people? I hope not. I hope not. But my real hope, and I think this is the better place to be, is just their examples, separate from legislation, which is what you're asking about, you know, new either local or state or national legislation to get at the issue of ethnic and religious hatred. Maybe that starts from the top with moral leadership. I hope so.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think to Julia's question and to add, I think on the one hand, I love what you said about sort of moral leadership from the top, Rachel. Like the decency, the personal example, the personal responsibility setting, and from the local perspective, like there is a lot of things that actually aren't solved at the federal level. There is a lot of you know, like when I think about like the debate about what to do with community policing, defund the police, that's a lot of that's at the local level, whether that's the state level, the city level, the county level, like a lot of the sort of implications of some of the ways hatred, racism is happening in our country around marginalized communities or around certain issues, I do believe has to happen at the local level. So I think they have to work in tandem, but again, like I remember when Obama was elected in 2008, I was living in New York, and like there was sort of a messianic sense around him for some people. And it was, you know, there were both jokes about it. It was like, you know, black man gets the worst job imaginable, recovering a country going through an economic recession. And also like, he's one guy. Like we don't supposedly we don't anoint kings in this country, and we also don't, you know, like we're not, you know, this is not the Messiah. Like they have their work cut out for them, and also we have our work cut out for us too. I mean, I think one of the fears in the communities that I was a part of before the election was, are people like, if Biden wins, will people think they no longer have to show up to fight the good fight, to get into the good trouble that John Lewis would talk about? Because I worry that people think, oh, yeah, got him. Now we don't have to do anything. It's like, are you kidding me? There were so many bad things that happened under Obama too. I mean, you know, plenty of Black kids were getting killed under an Obama presidency. It wasn't Obama's fault, but just because you have a Black man in office doesn't mean the things we have to fight in this country don't have to. Anyway, I hope that answered a little bit.
Thank you. So we have two questions that Joanna, who's our chat monitor, is going to read off for us, and the two of you should feel free to address them however you like.
Great. So we are running short on time, so I'm just going to abbreviate these. First question from Ellen. Rabbi Hirsch, your statement focused a lot on spirit and faith, and that is something that we are having a moral crisis around in this country. What does the Torah say about responding to crises of faith? And the next question was from Elaine about rethinking the Hanukkah story and how we can better understand the ties in of zealotry in our own Jewish history. So we have about 5 minutes just for folks before we wrap up.
So a question about allowing the Hanukkah story to continue to evolve in our communal consciousness. And the other question was about, what does the Torah teach about times of moral crisis? Am I getting that right? I wanted to start with the part about the question about the Hanukkah story, which is a tricky one. I mean, there's a very, very smart, very wise of those ancestors, I believe, to preference the story of light and miracles and, you know, rededication of sacred space, and avoid the fuller story, which was quite violent, and which also, by the way, includes a whole separate narrative about really, really angry infighting within the Jewish community that led to some of that destruction. So I don't blame our ancestors for putting that part aside as much as they could for the survival, for the good of the Jewish people going forward. And we all know that one of the complicated gifts of Zionism was the vision of a Jewish person as a person of not only intellectual strength, but also a person who had military agency, someone who has national strength, national power. And I think that the Jewish people have survived as long as we have by carefully balancing that. In no way, of course not, would we ever call for, for Jewish vigilantes to be out on the street. But we also have seen what can happen when we feel too timid to stand up for ourselves. I have to add that I'm constantly interested in the question of age. To a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, teach about the miracle of Hanukkah and let them feel the sweetness of it and the delight of it. And then as our kids become more abstract thinkers and able to absorb conflicting ideas, I think we should be teaching them about the military success and also the violent complications that come out of the Hanukkah story. And I think somebody in the chat I saw pointed out that it's not even in our canon. And should it be brought back in? Like it is a part of history. It's a part of our history. In fact, it's not even mythic history. It actually is history that we know about. Esther, do you want to say something to that question?
The faith question? Yeah, I'm not.
Torah say
about crisis of moral faith. I'm mostly. I'm not going to pull up some great pithy quote. I think what I'm thinking of is the story. I'm thinking both of Jacob and I'm thinking of Joseph. Well, I'm thinking of Jacob, I guess, and Joseph in the context of the story of Joseph going down and Jacob, like Jacob not giving up. But I keep thinking of the wrestling. Jacob's whole life was one of wrestling. From literally being in his mother's womb with Esau, then literally with the man we don't know about, and then sort of living the rest of his life in mourning over a child he didn't know, he was mourning over a child he thought had died, and then reuniting. And I say this because one, as someone who's never, I have plenty of doubt. I think if your faith has no doubt, then I struggle with what kind of faith it really is, how strong your faith is without doubt. So doubt and crisis are different, but I've never had a crisis, and I've never lost a child, God forbid. I'm healthy. Didn't live through the Shoah. But so for me, when I look at Torah, I look at our role models, maybe, the totally imperfect, dysfunctional people that they were. What does it mean to live a life and just constantly understand that the struggle is part of life, right? Like we don't ever see Jacob go like, why me? So for me, that's where I sit. And I admit also I'm one of those people who people have said to me, you seem to really like the struggle, or you seem to really embrace the struggle. Yeah, because I don't really think there's another way. I think that's part of I think that's part of what gives the life meaning.
That's actually a beautiful place for us to end. I want to honor everybody's time and thank you both before I turn it over to Joe again for such a rich array of teachings. And as somebody reminded us, or somebody lifted up in the chat, you really lifted up for us the fact that Judaism has a unique role to play in exerting its moral compass and in speaking and using our words in the unique way that we use words to help heal ourselves and our communities at this time. And I thank you both for lifting that up for us so powerfully. Thank you. And I will turn things over again to Joe Schifrin, who will close us out. Joe, I think you're on mute still. There you go.
Okay. And now I have to find, hang on just 1 second. Here we go. On behalf of everyone at JUFJ, thank you so much to our rabbis for teaching us, and thanks to all of you for sharing this time with us. We really want your feedback. We'll be sending you a survey by email and ask that you take 2 minutes to fill it out. We value your support and your presence with us in this time of COVID and political change. As always, your support is welcome. If you have not already made a gift to support the Heschel Vision Experience, please consider investing in JUFJ's programs. If you are so compelled, please go to jufj.org/donate. Gifts of every and any size are appreciated. It is thanks to our community's support that we can make a difference together. It's been an adventure to bring the Heschel Awards experience online to our community of supporters. Your participation has made it all worth it. The JUFJ staff and lay leaders thank you again for attending and look forward to seeing you again Thursday and at Heschel next year, hopefully in person. Good night, everyone, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.